Monday, Yud Ches Tevis, Tavshinayin Gimel, and we are in Tevis Menachem Sefer HaMa'amorim, at the end of the Mamar Vekibel Hayehudim, from Purim Tavshin Yud Aleph, and we are on page Memches, and we're just at the end of the paragraph, just before chapter 12, just before Ois Yud Beis. We're up to three lines before the end of the previous chapter, the one before Yud Beis, by the words V'yesh l'hosef. The Rebbe is putting the finishing touches on the explanation of Purim, what Purim added to Matan Torah, without which Matan Torah was not complete. The Rebbe explained that it brought Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, actual self-sacrifice into the process, because the Jews experienced actual self-sacrifice during Purim. And the self-sacrifice was such that it brought shleimus, it brought completeness, wholesomeness, into the fusion between the very highest levels and the very lowest levels. Not only did the self-sacrifice bring about bittul, not only did it annul the defining characteristics of the Tachtin, of the low beings, of the Yidden, of the Jews at that time, but it found, the very highest levels found actual expression, the very highest levels fused with the actual being, with the actual existence, with the actual defining characteristics of the Jews in that generation. In simple words, they lived that way. They were fueled and inspired and driven by the very highest levels to live their lives in an actual way with the highest ideal. And the Rebbe said the one that actually inspired the Jews to live like that was Mordechai. Without Mordechai, they might have had Mesiras Nefesh, they might have had self-sacrifice, but it would have been in a form of bittul. Would have annulled their defining characteristics. We're not sure that they would have lived Mesiras Nefesh, lived that way. Mordechai, being that he was the embodiment of the highest ideal, he in his daily life, before Haman, after Haman, during Haman, lived in the Lishma way, so he inspired the Jews to live in the same way. And he did that mainly through first teaching the 22,000 children. That was the last point we were discussing. Because children, in other words, this is more emphasized in children because children have the quality that they have hevel she'ein bechet, breath that has no sin. Because their bodies are less coarse than someone who has lived in this world for longer and has engaged in a lot of eating and drinking and fulfilling his tithes and so on and so forth, which brings a coarseness into the body, it desensitizes the person to the sensitivity of Gettlichkeit, of godliness. And also because their souls have just recently descended into this world. But since their actual learning is mipnei yiras haratzua, you don't see in the children's learning so much the idea of learning because of self-sacrifice. Rather, a child learns because he is told to. Yiras haratzua, the fear of the rod, he's afraid of the consequences. In the negative, or in the positive, he's induced by a reward. So where does the Mesiras Nefesh element come into it? Again, Mordechai Tzaddik brought that element into the children, because as we mentioned, when Haman came to Mordechai when he was coming towards Mordechai, whilst he was teaching the 22,000 children, Mordechai told the children, run away. Do not tie your fate to mine. Save yourselves. And they said, we're with you in life and in death. So the combination of Mordechai and the children brought about the real shleimus, the real wholesomeness into the process of Matan Torah by actualizing the very highest levels into day-to-day life. So up until this point, we're talking about what Mordechai brought in to the generation, to the Yidden, to the children. What about Mordechai himself? So in the last couple of lines, the Rebbe says, if we can add through the fact that Mordechai gathered 22,000 children. Through this, Mordechai acquired the special quality of the breath, the pure breath of children, which has no sin. And through this, he drew down, he fueled all the Jews in his generation with this matter as well, with this dimension as well. Which means to say that it's an interactive process. One feeds off the other. It takes a Mordechai to inspire, to gather the children. It takes a Mordechai to inspire the children, all the way to Mesiras Nefesh. And once Mordechai introduces that into the children, into the generation, he draws from them this idea of Hevel She'en Bechet. He acquires it as well. And through that, he's able to inspire the rest of the generation with it in turn. You know, the Mishnah says I believe it's in Avos, one of the sages says, I learned a lot from my teachers and from my friends. But from my students, I've learned more than from all. More than anyone. Right? When Mordechai was teaching the children, in other words, in the process of teaching, it's not just that the teacher teaches the children or the students, and it's a one-way street. It's from the teacher to the students. But through the fact, in a simple sense, when the teacher has to articulate the ideas, once you start looking at something which you know, but you're looking at it from the perspective of articulating it and communicating it, you gain a lot more. That's a fact. That's number one. We all have those experiences when we speak to our children, when they ask us questions and we have to articulate the answer. You suddenly have to flesh it out. You have to know what you're talking about, and that puts you into a situation where you suddenly see it from a different light. There's an added dimension. Why is that? Because spiritually, that's the way it is. It's an interactive process. It's not just one way. In Sfiras also, in the attributes of the upper realms, there's something which is known as Hiskalalus Sfiras. The Sfiras are really intermingled one with another. So you have Chesed and you have Gvura, right? But you have Gvura in Chesed and you have Chesed and Gvura, right? And one feeds off the other. And that brings shleimus into the entire process. Similarly, when we talk about Mordechai, it's not only that he was the one that gathered the 22,000 children and the one that infused them, fueled them with Mesiras Nefesh, but through that, he also drew from them. What did he draw from them? What was he lacking? This idea of Hevel She'en Bechet. Because as mentioned before, if you remember, the two sages, Rav Papa and Abaye, were discussing this idea. What about our Torah? How does that stack up relative to the children's Torah? And the answer was, yes, it's all fine and well. We're big tzaddikim and we learn Torah Lishma and so on and so forth. But the idea of Hevel She'en Bechet, the pure breath of a child, She'en Bechet, who has no sin, there's a special quality in that even the greatest tzaddik can do with absorbing and gaining, and he gains that through engaging in that process with the children. And in turn, he takes that special quality and communicates it back to the rest of the generation. So that's the idea. So therefore, through that process, we had complete shleimus, wholesomeness in the process of Matan Torah. And that answers the questions that the Rebbe asked in the beginning. Number one, why was it necessary to introduce this idea into the Maimer? The previous Rebbe introduces the idea into the Maimer, that the Yidden were at the lowest level, even the Gashmias, even in the physical state, in the physical sense? Because that's the idea. The idea is to reach the very lowest levels. So the fact that they were just in a low level spiritually, okay, that's one permeation, as it were, from the highest levels. But then, if they were in a low level, even physically, and there, the very highest levels permeated as well, that's an additional shleimus, into the additional completeness into the idea of Matan Torah, into the phenomenon of Matan Torah. And similarly, the Rebbe asked, the central question was, why was it necessary to have Mesiras Nefesh? Why was it so necessary to have Mesiras Nefesh in order to bring Matan Torah to its state of completeness? And the answer is, because again, the idea is to actualize the very highest and the very lowest, not just to have it in potential. When the Yidden said Nasa, when the Jews said Nasa, we will do, self-sacrifice was in potential. Yes, they took on to listen to the Torah, to follow the Torah under all circumstances, but it wasn't actualized.
They had the mountain over them. It was pretty existential. That's right.
Well, Chassidus actually interprets that as meaning that they were overwhelmed with love. In other words, Chassidus interprets that as meaning that the revelation of godliness was so powerful at Matan Torah that they couldn't refuse. They couldn't refuse. God was so unbelievably revealed. It was so overwhelming, overbearing, that it was impossible for anyone to say no. And in fact, that is one of the reasons why it's brought another Purim, the Mamar Vekibel. That's why Matan Torah wasn't complete at Sinai, because the Jews did not yet go through the acid test. Did you really accept the Torah? When you're standing in the Holy of Holies and you see fire and brimstone, or you see miracles in front of your eyes, what are you going to say? You can't. You know, it's right in front of your eyes. What happens when it's dark? When there is no revealed godliness? When God does not show you any love to the obvious eye. We don't see the love. On the contrary, it looks like God abandoned us. That's why Haman was able to make a decree to destroy all the Jews.
So in the first place, we were forced by love.
Correct. In fact, the Rambam says, concerning talking about force, the Rambam says when you're talking about ish chacham, an intellectual person, intelligent person, to persuade a person, to give an intelligent person a very strong, intelligent argument, is the highest form of compelling him to do something. So when the neshama sees revealed getlichkeit, revealed godliness, the neshama, you've got no choice. You're drawn to it. What happens when it's dark? What happens when there's no revealed getlichkeit? That's the question. Are you truly committed? That demonstrates that you're truly committed. In fact, this is one of the themes that the Rebbe discusses in the Mamar of Atat Tetzav, the last Mamar that the Rebbe handed out before he had the stroke. Purim Cotton, Tavshin and Beis. That's one of the themes that Rebbe discusses there. Let's try to wrap it up. Chapter 12. Based on all the above, we can understand why we are obligated to to drink on Purim until we don't know the difference between Ha'ar Haman Baruch Mordechai. Why? Because on the days of Purim each and every year, that which took place on the first Purim, this idea of Vekibel Hayehudim that the Jews accepted on Purim, which they began at Matan Torah, that idea is reawakened and reignited and re-experienced every single year. Not only is it re-experienced, on the contrary, it's at a higher level. We bring more shleimus into the process of Matan Torah every single year. You can add that the innovation of Purim over and above Matan Torah was in two ideas, in two concepts, in two matters. In the days of Purim, first of all, on Purim was the conclusion and the shleimus, the completeness, the wholesomeness of the receiving of the Torah, as we've explained at length above. The Gam, in addition to that, Kiyum HaTorah. it brought steadfastness and permanence into the process of Matan Torah. Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, was not yet necessarily permanent. How do we know? What does it mean it wasn't permanent? Of course, God gave the Torah, but so far as the Jews were concerned, did it gel with the Jewish people in a permanent way? No. Kedisa v'Gemara, as the Talmud says in Shabbos, ala pasuk Purim Mamar Vekibel Hayehudim. Talmud says on another verse in the Megillah, Purim Mamar Vekibel Hayehudim, the Jews fulfilled and accepted upon themselves. So the Talmud says, Kimu, they've fulfilled, they've established, they brought steadfastness, mashakiblu kvar, in that which they've received in the past, in the process of Matan Torah. Why? That which they received, what the revelations that the Jews received at the giving of the Torah, was not in the way of permanence, was not in an eternal way. Why? Because it says in Pashas Kisisa that after the sin of the golden calf, hisnatzlus edyom, they have removed their adornments, which means the giluyim, the revelations they received at Matan Torah, through the sin of worshiping the golden calf, they've cast that away, they've cast it off. So we see that the revelations they received at Matan Torah were not permanent. But concerning the days of Purim, it says that the days of Purim will not pass, will never be removed, and their memory will never be taken away, even from the children and offspring in future generations. What does that mean? The inner meaning of that means that those revelations, the actualization of Matan Torah, which took place at Purim, Kayim B'Kiyum Nitzchi, remains with an eternal existence, remains permanent. So therefore, that's another thing that was introduced in Purim. An additional aspect that Purim introduced into Matan Torah. So that takes place every single year, again, and at a higher level. That's the way it is at Purim every single year. It has two ideas to it. Each and every generation we bring additional shleimus, additional wholesomeness and completeness into the acceptance of the Torah as mentioned above. And also this addition has an eternal existence. And therefore, what's the call of the day of Purim? How do we serve Hashem on Purim? In a way of lo yada, not knowing, going out of our limitations, reaching our highest levels, leaving one's constraints. Because the completeness and the wholesomeness of receiving of the Torah comes about how? Through nullifying my defining characteristics. That's why on Purim I leave my defining characteristics. And how? How do I do that on Purim? The mitzvah is to do it, to reach that level through lipsume biyayin, having a meal, having a celebration with wine, physical wine. Why? Because the nullification that a person reaches on Purim needs to be also from the body's perspective, not like on Yom Kippur when we fast and we don't eat, but rather here we do eat and we do drink. We drink wine. As we mentioned at length above. This brings the giving of the strength for us to do this the whole year, which means this gives us the strength that matters of the body should not take up any place by the individual throughout the whole year. Therefore the body will not hinder the learning of the Torah throughout the whole year. Okay, we will finish the last part tomorrow.